I'd always consider myself lucky to live in the kind of neighborhood people put on postcards: tree-lined streets, neatly trimmed hedges, and houses with perfectly coordinated color palettes that made everything look as if it belonged in a home design magazine. But the one thing the brochures wouldn't tell you was that this slice of suburban paradise came with a price: a tyrannical HOA president named Karen. Now, I know the name Karen gets thrown around a lot these days, but trust me, if there were a global championship for nosy, overbearing, power-hungry HOA presidents, this woman would take home the gold every single year. Karen wasn't just any run-of-the-mill neighborhood watchdog. She was the self-appointed judge, jury, and executioner of anything she deemed unfit for her precious community standards. From the moment I moved in, she had made it her personal mission to correct my behavior, as if I were some kind of unruly teenager who needed to be disciplined. My grass was half an inch too long. My front door color was a shade too bold, and don't even get me started on the time I dared to put up a Halloween decoration 2 days earlier than her approved decorating window. But the thing that really ground my gears, the reason why Karen lived rent-free in my mind as the ultimate neighborhood villain, was her blatant habit of meddling in events that were meant to bring the community together. Every summer, our HOA held a neighborhood block party, and every summer, Karen turned it into her own personal dictatorship. She would dictate the menu, approve or deny every activity, and worst of all, make sure that anything she didn't personally like mysteriously disappeared before the event could even begin. Some might call her passionate. I called her a suburban menace. But despite her reign of terror, there was one event I looked forward to every year: the annual Oakwood Heights pie baking competition. It was the one time of year when the neighborhood came together to celebrate something pure and simple: delicious, homemade pies. No HOA rules, no Karen interference, or so I thought, just good old-fashioned competition with a shiny blue ribbon at stake. And this year, this year was going to be my year. I had spent weeks perfecting my recipe, a masterpiece of culinary genius, a sweet and spicy concoction that would leave the judges stunned. The secret: a carefully measured dose of ghost peppers, blended seamlessly into a rich, caramelized apple filling, hidden beneath a flaky, golden brown crust. It was the perfect mix of tradition and surprise, a Trojan horse of fire and sweetness that would guarantee my victory. But as I would soon learn, nothing in Oakwood Heights was safe from Karen's meddling, not even my prize-winning pie. Baking had always been a passion of mine, but this year's Oakwood Heights pie baking competition was personal. For the past 3 years, my pies had ranked second place, always losing to the same woman, Mrs. Beverly Lancaster. Now, don't get me wrong, Beverly was a sweet old lady who made a mean pecan pie, but I knew deep down that my recipes had been superior each year. The problem? The judges were too safe, too traditional. They wanted familiar flavors, comforting and predictable. But this time, I had something that would force them to sit up and take notice: the Inferno Apple Surprise, a pie that looked like an innocent cinnamon-laced dream on the outside but delivered a slow-building, deliciously fiery kick thanks to the finely diced ghost peppers hidden in the filling. It wasn't just a novelty. It was balanced, flavorful, and unlike anything they had ever tasted before. I had tested it on my best friend, Lisa, who had initially doubted my sanity, but ended up eating half the pie in one sitting while laughing through happy, spicy tears. "This is evil," she had said between bites. "But like the good kind of evil. You're gonna win this thing for sure." I spent the entire Friday before the contest meticulously preparing. I handpicked the Granny Smith apples, ensuring they were tart enough to contrast beautifully with the caramelized brown sugar and butter. I roasted the ghost peppers just enough to deepen their flavor, then carefully blended them into the apple mixture, making sure their heat wouldn't overpower the sweetness. The crust was my signature: buttery, flaky perfection, latticed just enough to give a sneak peek at the golden filling inside. When I pulled it out of the oven, the kitchen smelled like heaven: warm spices, rich caramel, and just the faintest whisper of something unexpected. I let it cool, placed it in a labeled, airtight container, and set it on the counter, feeling a swell of pride. This was it. This was the pie that would finally break my second-place streak. The next morning, I woke up extra early, eager to get everything ready for the contest, which would be held at the HOA's community center. I brewed myself a celebratory cup of coffee, stretched, and walked into the kitchen to retrieve my pie, only to feel my stomach drop. The counter was empty. My pie was gone. The container, the carefully crafted masterpiece I had spent hours on, had vanished into thin air. I stood there in stunned silence for a moment, my brain scrambling to process the sheer impossibility of it. Had I moved it somewhere? Had Lisa stopped by for an early morning taste test? No, Lisa wasn't insane. She valued her life too much to touch my competition pie before judging. That left only one possibility. Someone had stolen it. But who? And more importantly, why? I checked the front door locked. The back door locked. There was no sign of forced entry, no shattered windows, nothing to suggest an intruder had broken in during the night. And then, as I stood there trying to piece it all together, a sickening realization dawned on me. My stomach tightened. There was one person in this neighborhood bold enough, petty enough, and sneaky enough to pull something like this off. A person who had a history of making things she didn't like simply disappear. Karen. I bolted out the door, my heartbeat pounding in my ears, and headed straight for Karen's house. It was barely 8 a.m., but I didn't care. This was an emergency. If she had taken my pie, there was still a chance I could retrieve it before the contest. Maybe she had stolen it just to sabotage me, or maybe she planned to submit it as her own. Either way, I wasn't going down without a fight. But when I arrived, ready to bang on her door and demand justice, I was met with an unexpected sight that made my breath hitch in my throat. There, on Karen's front porch, was a half-empty pie container. My pie container. And next to it, Karen, sitting smugly in her porch chair with a fork in her hand, licking the last remnants of apple filling off her lips. She had already eaten some. She had no idea what she had just done. For a solid 5 seconds, I just stood there, frozen, watching Karen with my mouth slightly open in shock. It was like watching a horror movie in slow motion, the villain sitting smugly, thinking she had won, completely unaware that she had just doomed herself. She must have sensed me staring because she finally looked up, smirking like a cat that had just swallowed a canary. "Oh, good morning," she said, dabbing the corners of her mouth with a napkin as if she were some kind of royalty. "You're up early." I clenched my fists, barely resisting the urge to grab the empty container and wave it in her face. "Where did you get that?" I demanded, pointing at the evidence, my evidence, sitting right there on her little decorative approved table. Karen had the audacity to tilt her head and feign innocence. "Oh, this." She gestured lazily toward the container. "Someone must have left it outside my door." I assumed it was a kind neighbor's way of apologizing for all the rule-breaking I've had to deal with lately. She took another dainty sip of her coffee, her smugness practically radiating off her. It was delicious, by the way. I might just enter it in the competition myself. My blood pressure skyrocketed. She had taken it. She had snuck onto my property, probably late last night or early this morning, and stolen my pie. And now she was sitting here, acting as if she were doing me a favor by eating it, as if I had somehow wronged her, and this was just karma balancing itself out. I took a slow, deep breath. "Karen," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "That was my competition pie." For the briefest of moments, I saw something flicker in her expression, surprise, hesitation, but she masked it quickly, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. "Oh, was it?" she said, all faux innocence. "You really should be more careful with your things, dear. If you leave food out where anyone can grab it, you can't blame people for assuming it's free for the taking." Oh, this woman was unbelievable. She knew exactly what she had done. She wasn't even trying to deny it, just twisting the situation so that somehow I looked like the careless one. My hands clenched at my sides. I could already imagine the glee she must have felt when she swiped my pie, thinking she was ruining my chances of winning. She probably assumed I'd be left scrambling, pieless, and humiliated in front of the whole neighborhood. But what Karen didn't know was that she hadn't just stolen any pie. She had stolen a ticking time bomb of ghost peppers disguised as a sweet, harmless dessert. And by the looks of it, she had already eaten a generous amount. I had two options. Option 1, tell her right then and there that she had just inhaled the culinary equivalent of a nuclear reactor meltdown, grab my empty container, and storm away in victory. But where was the fun in that? No, I had something better in mind. "Wow," I said, forcing a tight smile. "I guess that's my fault, then. I should have been more careful. Karen's smirk deepened, mistaking my forced humility for defeat. It's a good thing you weren't planning on entering it, she said with a mocking little laugh. I mean, really a pie like this? Too bold for the judges, don't you think? Oh, if only she knew. I decided to play along. You're probably right, I said, shrugging. I just hope it wasn't too much for you, though. You know, flavor-wise. Karen rolled her eyes and waved a dismissive hand. Oh, please. I have a very refined palate, she boasted. I can handle anything. I bit back a laugh. She had no idea what she had just signed up for. Good to know, I said, casually glancing at my watch. Well, I should get going. Big day ahead, you know. I guess I'll see you at the competition. Oh, you will, Karen said with a smug little smirk. I might even enter this my pie, since I know it's a guaranteed winner. I barely managed to keep a straight face. I'd love to see that, I said, turning to walk away before I completely lost it. As I made my way back home, the reality of the situation sank in. Karen wasn't just going to eat a few stolen bites of my pie. She was planning to serve it at the competition. She was about to unknowingly present a ghost pepper-loaded, face-melting pie to a panel of unsuspecting judges, and probably take a few more bites herself while boasting about how delicious it was. A slow, delighted grin spread across my face. This was no longer just a case of theft. This was unintentional revenge at its finest. I could barely contain my excitement as I made my way back home. My original plan had been to win the competition, but this was something even better. Karen had stolen my pie, planned to pass it off as her own, and had no idea that she was about to set herself and the unsuspecting judges on fire with every bite. It was poetic justice, the kind of karmic retribution that was too perfect to script. And the best part, I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was sit back and watch as the ghost peppers did their job. The competition was set to start at noon in the Oakwood Heights Community Center, a stuffy, beige-colored building that Karen had personally redesigned a few years ago. The judges, Mr. Thompson, the HOA treasurer, Beverly Lancaster, my usual rival, and Father O'Malley, the local pastor, were already seated at the long judging table when I arrived. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, mingling near the refreshment table and chatting excitedly about the annual showdown. Normally, I would have been setting up my own pie, arranging it carefully on the checkered tablecloth, anxiously waiting for my turn to present it. But not today. Because today, Karen had unknowingly entered my pie for me. Sure enough, there she was, hovering near the judge's table, radiating smugness as she placed my pie in front of them like it was her crowning achievement. She had even renamed it, because of course she had. The little tag in front of it read, Karen's Signature Cinnamon Apple Delight. I nearly laughed out loud. The audacity. She had taken my masterpiece, slapped her own name on it, and was now standing there like a proud peacock, waiting for the praise to roll in. Oh, this was going to be good. I slid into a seat near the front, keeping my eyes trained on the judges as they examined each pie. There were the usual classics, blueberry cherry pumpkin, but when they reached Karen's, my pie, I saw their faces light up. The look of it was award-worthy, perfectly golden, beautifully latticed, a true work of art. Karen beamed. Oh, I just love experimenting with bold flavors, she said loudly, making sure the whole room could hear. I really think this one is special. Oh, Karen, you have no idea. Mr. Thompson went first, cutting himself a neat slice and taking a large bite. For a brief second, everything was normal. He chewed, nodding thoughtfully, as if savoring the warm cinnamon and buttery crust. But then it happened. His expression shifted, a small twitch at the corner of his mouth, a sudden stiffness in his posture. His eyes widened ever so slightly, as if his brain was just now registering what was happening in his mouth. He swallowed, barely, and reached for his water with an urgency that did not go unnoticed. The room watched in silence as he took a deep, slow inhale through his nose. Quite bold, he managed to say, his voice a full octave higher than before. Karen clapped her hands together in delight. Oh, I knew you'd love it. Beverly was up next. She sliced off a bite, completely unaware of the culinary ambush she was about to experience. She took a bite, chewed, paused. I watched her nostrils flare. She blinked rapidly. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. Then, like a dam breaking, her face ignited. On my word," Beverly gasped, fanning her mouth with both hands. Her carefully composed expression crumbled into a mask of sheer panic. "Oh, heavens, what is?" Father O'Malley, already mid-bite, suddenly stiffened in his chair. The fork slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the plate. Beads of sweat bloomed across his forehead. His face turned an alarming shade of red, his lips parting like he wanted to speak, but all that came out was a strangled wheeze. The spice had fully hit. Chaos erupted. Mr. Thompson grabbed his napkin and began violently dabbing his forehead. Beverly was gulping water like she had just emerged from the desert. Father O'Malley, God bless him, had pressed his hands together in what could only be described as a desperate, silent prayer. Karen, still oblivious, laughed. "Oh, I knew the judges would love my pie," she cooed, completely missing the fact that Father O'Malley now looked like he was seeing the gates of heaven itself. Then Beverly wheezed. A loud, dramatic wheeze. And that was when Karen finally realized something was wrong. "What?" she said, her smile faltering as she glanced between the judges. "Wait, what's wrong with it?" Beverly, eyes watering, jabbed a shaky finger at the pie. "What?" she gasped. "Did you put in this?" Karen blinked, looking genuinely confused. "Just cinnamon and then, as if the universe had scripted it, Karen made the worst mistake of her life. She grabbed a fork, sliced off a generous bite, and shoved it into her own mouth. I swear to this day, I have never seen karma work so fast. The second the bite hit her tongue, I watched her soul leave her body. Her entire face froze, mouth full, eyes bulging, like her brain was screaming at her to abort mission, but it was too late. The spice had taken hold. A choked, garbled sound came from her throat, somewhere between a cough and a scream. Her hands flailed. She grabbed her own collar like she was about to rip it clean off. And then she ran. A mean full sprint, arms flapping, no dignity left to her name, ran straight to the refreshment table. She lunged for a pitcher of lemonade, but in her panic, she knocked it over. The liquid spilled across the table as Karen let out a muffled, high-pitched shriek, her face now the exact shade of a boiled lobster. By now, the entire room was watching in stunned silence. Even the judges, still recovering, were mesmerized by the spectacle unfolding before them. Karen, desperate, snatched a piece of bread off a nearby plate and stuffed it into her mouth, but it wasn't enough. She coughed, then gagged. Then she turned, locked eyes with me, and somehow realized the truth. "Why you?" she wheezed, jabbing an accusatory finger in my direction. "What did you do?" I just smiled. "Wow," I said, grinning ear to ear. "I knew you could handle anything, Karen." The moment Karen realized what had happened, she lost it. And by lost it, I mean full-scale meltdown, arms flailing, face contorted in horror, sweat pouring down her temples like she had just finished a marathon in the Sahara Desert. Her lips quivered as the heat tore through her sinuses, her breathing erratic and desperate. The entire room was dead silent, every single person watching as she staggered back from the refreshment table like she had been personally attacked by the gates of hell. Her eyes were wide with panic, and I knew, that this was the precise moment when she realized she had made the greatest mistake of her life. A single, hoarse wheeze escaped her throat. Then, "You." She jabbed a trembling, sweaty finger at me, her voice cracking somewhere between rage and absolute, blistering agony. Her entire body shook as if she were experiencing some sort of existential crisis. What did you do?" I leaned back in my chair, calm as ever, and raised an eyebrow. "You mean your pie?" I asked, deliberately emphasizing the words. "The one you stole?" Karen's mouth opened and closed, gasping like a fish out of water. She had been so smug before, so sure that she had pulled one over on me, and now here she was, melting in front of the entire neighborhood. She stammered, grabbing at her throat as if she could physically remove the fire from inside her. You poisoned me." The moment the word poison left her mouth, a wave of concerned murmurs spread through the crowd. People turned to each other, whispering in hushed voices. Even the judges, still recovering, looked up sharply. I folded my arms. "Oh, come on, Karen. You just said 5 minutes ago that you love experimenting with bold flavors. That's just bold flavor, isn't it? A single tear escaped her left eye. If this isn't bold, you tried to kill me, she screeched, her voice reaching an ear-piercing decibel that probably startled dogs 3 neighborhoods over. I shrugged. It's not my fault you stole a pie without knowing what was in it. Maybe you should be more careful with your things, I said, throwing her own words back at her. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Karen's face twisted in unfiltered rage, but her body betrayed her. The spice was still working its magic. Her knees wobbled, her breath came in short, uneven gasps, and her entire soul looked like it was exiting her body. And then it happened. Karen dropped to her knees. Right there, in the middle of the judging floor, in front of half the neighborhood, she collapsed like a tragic Shakespearean heroine. "Oh my God!" someone gasped from the crowd. Mrs. Jenkins, our elderly next-door neighbor, clutched her pearls like she had just witnessed a crime. "Somebody help her!" another woman shrieked. Mr. Thompson, still dabbing his profusely sweating forehead, cleared his throat. I think it's just a very, very spicy," he muttered. Karen whipped around toward him, betrayal written across her entire face. You let me eat it," she howled, like this was some sort of conspiracy against her. "Well," Father O'Malley croaked out, his voice barely functioning. "Technically, you fed it to yourself." A stunned silence. And then, someone snorted. At first, it was just one person, a barely stifled chuckle from the back of the room. But then another, and another. And before I knew it, the entire room had erupted into laughter, an uncontrollable rolling wave of giggles, gasps, and outright howling. Even the judges, still sweating buckets from the ghost pepper aftermath, were laughing. Karen, on her knees, looking like she had just experienced spiritual warfare, watched in horror as the entire room cackled at her expense. She sputtered. You think this is funny?" "Yes," someone called from the back. I nodded. "Yeah, a little." Karen clawed at the table, pulling herself up, her entire face now a terrifying shade of crimson. But it wasn't just from the heat. It was pure, unadulterated embarrassment. She started, but the words wouldn't come out. And then asterisk, as if the universe wasn't done humiliating her yet. Asterisk, her stomach growled. Loudly, painfully. Karen's eyes widened in horror. I gasped dramatically. "Oh no. Did you eat a lot?" I asked, my voice drenched in mock concern. Karen's face paled. Her body went rigid. A slow, creeping realization dawned on her, one that hit her harder than the ghost peppers ever could. Her stomach wasn't just hurting. It was about to seek vengeance. And then, in a move so swift it left a blur behind, Karen threw herself toward the exit, knocking over a chair in her haste. The room erupted in more laughter. The HOA's reigning tyrant, the queen of suburban dictatorship herself, had been officially defeated. The aftermath of Karen's ghost pepper-fueled humiliation was nothing short of legendary. The moment she sprinted out of the community center, clutching her stomach like her very soul was trying to escape, the entire room fell into an uproar of laughter, disbelief, and most importantly, victory. Even the judges, still red-faced and sweaty from their own brush with fire, couldn't hide their amusement. But I knew, we all knew, that Karen wasn't the type to just accept defeat and move on. No, Karen was the type to come back swinging. And sure enough, not even 10 minutes later, the doors to the community center burst open like something out of a courtroom drama. And there she was, hair disheveled, makeup smudged, still sweating buckets, but angrier than I had ever seen her. "That pie was sabotage," she shrieked, her voice hoarse from whatever unfortunate digestive battle she had just endured in the privacy of the HOA office bathroom. The laughter immediately died down. Everyone turned toward her. Some people still had tears in their eyes from laughing too hard. Others were struggling to keep straight faces. But Karen, she wasn't laughing. Oh no, she was out for blood. Her wild, accusing eyes locked onto me. She spat, pointing a trembling, rage-fueled finger at me. "You did this on purpose. You tried to poison me." A few people murmured in confusion. Some actually looked worried. But I was ready. I crossed my arms. "Oh." Did I? I said casually, tilting my head. Funny because I thought that was your pie. You know, the one you stole from me. Karen's entire face twitched. That isn't the point, she screeched. You knew it was loaded with whatever the hell that was. I smiled. Oh, this was too good. You mean ghost peppers? I said sweetly. The crowd gasped. Karen stiffened like I had just told her she was on a federal watch list. You admit it, she howled. I shrugged. I mean, yeah. It was my pie. A very clearly labeled pie, by the way. The one you stole and then tried to enter as your own. I smiled wider. Which means, technically, you sabotage yourself. Another round of murmurs from the crowd. Beverly, my longtime rival, now my unofficial ally in this battle of justice, adjusted her glasses. Wait, you're telling me that Karen entered a pie that she didn't even bake? All eyes turned back to Karen. Karen's mouth opened and closed, panicked. I didn't. Beverly narrowed her eyes. And you were going to take credit for it? More whispers. A few nods of agreement. Karen visibly flinched. That isn't. Father O'Malley, still wiping at his brow, let out a long, suffering sigh. Karen, he said, voice exhausted from both the heat and the situation, did you, or did you not, steal this poor woman's pie and try to claim it as your own? Karen turned beet red. For the first time ever, she actually looked nervous. Oh. She glanced around, clearly realizing she had lost control of the situation. People were no longer laughing, they were watching. And not just watching, judging. The exact things she feared most. Her pride and control over this neighborhood were dangling by a thread, and she knew it. Finally, she snapped. I was just trying to teach her a lesson, she shouted, desperate, trying to spin the narrative. She has no respect for the for the rules. I took it because I knew she would try to pull something like this. She is a menace. A disruption to this community. Silence. Absolute. Silence. Then. So you admit you stole it? Someone called out. Karen froze. The color drained from her face. Slowly, she turned toward the source of the voice, Mrs. Jenkins, our sweet, elderly neighbor who had spent years listening to Karen's ridiculous HOA complaints. The entire room stared. Karen's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, a way to spin it. But there was none. She had just buried herself. I decided to twist the knife. Well, I said, feigning concern, if you knew I was going to pull something, why did you eat so much of it? Why did you try to pass it off as yours? Why enter it into the contest? Karen gaped at me. She looked at the crowd, at the dozens of skeptical, knowing faces. And then for the first time ever, she had no answer. She had lost. A long, agonizing silence passed. Then Mr. Thompson, still fanning his face, shook his head. Well, he muttered, that certainly settles it. Beverly crossed her arms. I think the judges need to have a little discussion about what happens now. The crowd whispered again. Karen swallowed. You wait, she stammered. You can. Karen, Mr. Thompson sighed, exasperated. Please sit down. We'll be making a decision shortly. Karen visibly struggled, like she wanted to keep fighting, but she knew. She had been caught. She had no more excuses. With no other option, she slinked away, defeated, humiliated, and most importantly, powerless. I leaned back in my chair, satisfied. Victory had never tasted so sweet. As Karen slumped into a chair at the back of the room, face still flushed from both rage and the residual firestorm in her throat, a heavy silence settled over the community center. The HOA judges, Mr. Thompson, Beverly, and Father O'Malley, exchanged glances, still recovering from their own brush with the ghost pepper apocalypse. Mr. Thompson let out a long, suffering sigh as he wiped his forehead. Well, he muttered, shaking his head, I think we've had enough of excitement for one afternoon. Beverly, still side-eyeing Karen with the wrath of a woman scorned, adjusted her glasses. I'd say this whole ordeal has been quite the eye-opener, she said, her voice sharp. Not just about the contest, but about certain individuals in our community. Karen visibly stiffened. I bit the inside of my cheek, doing everything in my power to keep from smirking. Father O'Malley, bless him, cleared his throat, still dabbing at the sweat clinging to his collar. Now, let's be clear, he said, his voice hoarse but firm. This was not sabotage. This was a clear case of theft and dishonesty. He glanced pointedly at Karen, whose eyes darted to the floor. And I, for one, am deeply disappointed. A low murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. Karen's head snapped up. "Oh, come on," she screeched, her voice still strained from the spice-induced trauma. I was just trying to." Mr. Thompson held up a hand. "Karen, please," he interrupted, his patience long gone. "We've heard enough." He turned to the audience. "Now, given the circumstances, I believe we have two major issues to address." The crowd leaned in. "First," he continued, "as for the pie competition, well, we all know that the real baker of that pie was not Karen." Karen went rigid. Beverly nodded firmly. "Which means," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "the rightful entry belongs to its original creator." Which was? She turned to me. The room followed. I blinked. "Oh, you mean me?" I asked innocently. A few people snickered. Father O'Malley gave me a knowing look. "Yes, dear. You." I took a slow, deliberate breath, savoring the moment. Then, with dramatic flair, I shrugged. "Well, I suppose that does make me the rightful contestant." The crowd erupted into cheers. Karen's jaw dropped. "Wait, what?" she screeched. "You can't just." Beverly ignored her. She turned to Mr. Thompson. "Do we even need to vote on this?" Mr. Thompson shook his head. "I don't see a need." Father O'Malley raised his hand. "I agree. The winner of this year's Oakwood Heights pie competition is," he gestured toward me, "our rightful baker." A round of applause filled the room. Karen's sputtering rage was drowned out completely. I sat there, basking in my well-earned victory, as several neighbors patted me on the back, congratulating me on both the win and the unintentional justice I had served. Lisa, who had been recording the whole thing on her phone because she was a genius, leaned in and whispered, "I have never been prouder of you." I beamed. "I'd like to thank the Academy, but the best part—" "Oh, the absolute best part." Beverly, with a wicked little smirk, reached over and picked up the winner's blue ribbon. She held it out to me. I hesitated for only a second before taking it, making sure to meet Karen's glare head-on as I pinned it onto my shirt. Her face? Priceless. But just when I thought it couldn't get any better, Mr. Thompson spoke again. "Now," he said, raising his voice slightly, "we come to the second issue at hand." The room quieted. Karen froze. "The fact remains," he continued, his tone heavy, "that this is not the first time we've had incidents involving our HOA president overstepping boundaries." A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. Karen's face drained of color. Wait," she stammered, looking around. "What are you?" "We've had complaints," Beverly said coolly. "Many complaints." Father O'Malley sighed. "Too many." Karen's eyes darted back and forth. She gripped the edge of her chair. "Why, you can't seriously be." "We'll be holding a formal vote next week," Mr. Thompson announced. "A vote to determine whether Karen will remain our HOA president." The room erupted. People started clapping. Others cheered. Some even whistled. And Karen, she sat there frozen, looking like she had just been sentenced to exile. For the first time in years, she had completely lost control. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. The moment Mr. Thompson announced the upcoming vote to remove Karen as HOA president, the energy in the room shifted. Excitement, anticipation, a kind of hope that had been missing for years. Neighbors were whispering to each other, nodding, exchanging knowing looks. It was as if the entire neighborhood had been waiting for this moment, for someone to finally put a stop to Karen's reign of terror. And there she sat, completely frozen, gripping the arms of her chair like they were her last lifeline. But you can't do that," she sputtered. I've dedicated years to this neighborhood." "Who else would?" "Oh, I'm sure we'll manage just fine." Beverly cut in smoothly, arms crossed. "You know, without someone stealing our baked goods and enforcing ridiculous rules." Karen's mouth opened and closed, her hands trembling with either rage or the lingering ghost pepper inferno still haunting her digestive system. Maybe both. Mr. Thompson raised a hand to quiet the room. A formal vote will take place next week, he said. In the meantime, Karen, we strongly suggest you take a step back from making any unilateral decisions. Translation, your dictatorship is officially over. Karen visibly paled. Her power, her one true source of superiority over the neighborhood, was slipping right through her fingers, and she knew it. I just sat there, watching her squirm, the blue ribbon pinned to my chest like a badge of honor. This was quite possibly the greatest moment of my life. But then, it got even better. The event was officially over. Neighbors milled around, chatting excitedly, discussing the upcoming vote. A few people came up to congratulate me on both the pie contest and the unintentional justice I had served. Lisa, still grinning ear to ear, nudged me with her elbow. You know, she whispered, I cannot wait to see her face when she finds out what else is coming. I raised an eyebrow. What else? Lisa's smile turned mischievous. Oh, you haven't heard. She leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Apparently, a few of the board members have been looking into some of Karen's past decisions, financial records, fines she's handed out, little fees she's charged people for rule violations that don't actually exist. My eyes widened. You're kidding. Lisa smirked. No. And let's just say, there's more than a few red flags. I glanced across the room, where Karen was still sitting stiff as a board, eyes darting around as if she could somehow regain control of the situation. She had ruled this neighborhood with an iron fist for years. But now the house of cards was collapsing. And it was all because of a stolen pie. 1 week later, I stood in the community center again, this time watching with absolute glee as Karen sat grim-faced and stiff at the front of the room while the votes were counted. One by one, slips of paper were unfolded. One by one, the results became crystal clear. By the time the final vote was read, the outcome was undeniable. Karen had been officially voted out as HOA president. The room erupted into cheers. And Karen, she sat there, silent, humiliated, powerless. For the first time ever, she had no control. It was beautiful. Lisa squeezed my arm. This is the single greatest thing I've ever witnessed. I grinned. I know. But the real cherry on top, Karen, after years of harassing the neighborhood, stealing pies, enforcing ridiculous rules, and making everyone miserable, had one final punishment waiting for her. With so many records now being examined, the HOA board had decided that Karen would not just be removed from her position. She would also be fined for her past, unofficial rule violations and fees. And who was responsible for handling the official notice? Oh, that would be me. Poetic justice, serve hot. The next day, I took a leisurely stroll down the block, stopping at Karen's house, official HOA letter in hand. She answered the door with the sourest expression I'd ever seen. I handed her the envelope, giving her my sweetest, most innocent smile. Karen, I said, tilting my head just so. You should really be more careful with your things. Her entire face contorted. I turned on my heel and walked away, victorious. Because after all the years of torment, the rules, the pettiness, the stolen decorations, the ridiculous fines, the endless battles, a pie had finally taken her down. And honestly, it had never tasted sweeter.